Okay, so to wrap up here, who did not benefit from this war? These three groups right here, okay? Now, the French and the Native Americans, that makes sense, right? They lost the war, and so they did not benefit. They did not gain from this war. They lost a lot, okay? The colonists, we'll talk last about them. That's kind of a confusing thing, because didn't they win the war? Weren't they part of the group? We scroll back up here, who were the two sides? If the British and the colonists won, then why did the colonists not benefit from the war? And we'll talk about them last. So first, the French, easy. The French could not take the Ohio River Valley. That's easy, right? That's what they were fighting for. That's what they were so excited to win. And they weren't able to do it, right? Because they lost. They lost the war. Okay. Now, the Native Americans, why did they not benefit from the war? Okay. They lost their protection from the French. And so if you remember, the French had said, you know what? If you live in that Ohio River Valley, we're going to take it, and then we're going to protect you. They can't take your land, all right? The British people, they cannot kick you out of the Ohio River Valley. It'll be ours, and we will make sure that you can continue to live there. Now that the British won, and they won the Ohio River Valley, the French was not able to protect them anymore. Okay? Now, that may seem like, okay, that's very sad, kind of a bummer, but it kind of started something that didn't really ever end until very recently. Okay, so the Native Americans ended up getting kicked out of the Ohio River Valley, which is sad, right? So what I want to do here actually is I want to insert an image. Okay. So I want to insert an image here. What I want you to look up is American Reservations Map. Now, yes, the Native Americans were kicked out of the Ohio River Valley and were forced to move. Okay, that's a big deal, but at the end of the day, it's not a huge area, right? They have the rest of the entire, that Louisiana area where the French were living. They were able to move there. It wasn't their original home, but it wasn't the end of the world, right? The image that I want to put onto the bottom of the slides here is what the land that Native Americans are able to live on now. Okay? Now, everything that you see in white, this is the United States. Everything that you see in white is where Native Americans used to be able to live free. There were no British, there were no French. Thousands of years ago, Native Americans could live in this entire area. This was their land. This is where they were. This is where they had lived for thousands of years. Where their great-grandmas, great-great-grandmas, great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmas all grew up and lived in this area. The British came through, created their own country called the United States, and now Native Americans can only live on the areas that are red. Okay? So, yes, the British kicked the Native Americans out of the Ohio River Valley for their own, eventually, but that wasn't where they stopped. You can see that every single Native American tribe has been pushed onto these reservations, and this was really the first time, so I'm going to copy this image here and put it onto the slides. This was the first time that the British kicked Native Americans out of their land. Well, I guess it wasn't the first time. They had been doing it before in the colonies where they had lived, but this was kind of one of the bigger ones, and then it never stopped. It continued. Once we became our own country, it happened for hundreds of years after that. Right? So that was very sad. The Native Americans definitely did not benefit from this war, and you can go today. You can see here's Minnesota. You can go up to northern Minnesota and visit reservations where there are Native American tribes there. Before, Native American tribes lived all over this area. They roamed, they had their own space, and now there's just these little tiny spaces that we forced them on. I grew up in South Dakota. and part of growing up in South Dakota was learning about reservations, and I was always so surprised and confused about how this even happened. Why did we do this to these people? And that is something that you will learn next year in 6th grade with Ms. Gelso in social studies. You'll learn more about why this happened and all of those reasons. Okay, but the Ohio River Valley, you can see here is the Ohio River Valley today. You can see no red spots, no Native Americans there. All right. Okay, last part, the colonists. Like I said, this is kind of the confusing one. Like, didn't they win the war? Why would they have not benefited, right? Now, the colonists, they want to move into the Ohio River Valley, right? This area that they just took, they won the war. They got to keep this little area up here, this little striped area. They finally won. They really wanted to. One of the reasons why they helped the king and queen to fight was because they live over here, and they wanted to go into this new area, right? It was getting a little bit crowded over here. They wanted to move a little bit farther to the west. They heard that there's some good land over there to make, or to farm, to, it's a little bit quieter over there, not as many big towns. And they felt that they had fought for it, and they really wanted to move there, all right? So they wanted to move into the Ohio River Valley, but the king said no. They wanted to move into the Ohio River Valley, these colonists, just these regular people that helped the king fight this war against the French. They wanted to move into that area that they had won, that they had taken during the war. They said, hey, we helped you with that. We're going to go move over there. King says, no, you can't. Okay? Now, the reason why he says no is because, if we look back over here, in this area, in the Ohio River Valley, what lives there are Native Americans, right? Eventually, many years later, British people do kick Native Americans out of this area. But for right now, Native Americans do live in this area. Now, I don't know about you, but if I were a Native American and somebody came into my house and said, okay, you have to leave, get out, I would not go down without a fight. Right? This is my home. You can't take it from me. You cannot kick me off of where I live. Right? The king just spent tons and tons of money in this war. Right? This war was against a really big army. It cost a lot of money. And this was actually, the 7 Years' War was actually a world war. The British Army was fighting all over the world. This is just really I don't want to say the most important part of the fight, but it is a very important part. But the British Army, the British government, the king, lost tons of money during this fight. And so the last thing that he wanted to do, the king, was to send in colonists over to this new area that they just got, and then have to fight more and have to start a new war with the Native Americans. He didn't want to do that. That was going to cost too much money. And so when the colonists said, hey, king, thank you so much. We are going to go move over to that new land that we just got. And the king says no, because you are going to have to fight people, and it's going to cost money, and money is something that we do not have right now. All right? Colonists were very sad. All right? That is kind of the first step. There's going to be, we're going to wrap up this war today. We're going to talk about a new war coming up here in a couple weeks. It's called the American Revolution. All right? We'll talk about that. This was the first step. These colonists are going to be we might want to call them the heroes in some ways in the American Revolution. There's some ways why we might call them the villains, but for the most part, we'll call them the heroes. When we talk about the American Revolution, it's important to remember this right here, what happened after the 7 Years' War. Right? This is the first step. This is the first reason why they were so mad at the king. Okay? There's a lot of things that we're going to talk about in the next couple of days. Other reasons why they were mad, that it kind of got to a point where they said, you know what, you have just been messing with us so long, king. You have been stepping on us and have been treating us like we are nothing. We are finally going to fight back. But this right here, this is the first step. All right? Now, last slide, this is for you to answer. If you or a family member fought so that you could move somewhere that you really wanted to move, you had to fight people, you had to fight human beings to go somewhere new, but then you were told that you have to stay, how would you feel? Okay? Because this is what happened to the colonists. The people that lived in the colonies, they really wanted to move to that new area, and they had just fought for it, and the king said, nope, sorry, you have to stay put. I want you to think about how you would feel about that. All right? So, let me give you a quick sentence starter, and then I'll let you go. I would feel sad because, okay, or I would feel angry because, right? So you tell me how you would feel about that. You got to put yourself back in the mind of somebody who lived in the colonies, right? And then tell me why too. Okay? So, that is everything for today. When you finish with this right here, what you have just completed, you need to make sure you look up at the agenda to see what is next. Okay? There's a few things that I want you to do once you're done with this assignment. All right? If you have any questions, ask Miss V, and she will help you out. Good luck.